WPVI TV, Philadelphia, serving New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. Dr. Peter Schindler, our guest on Perspective Delaware today, is with the Regional Council of Child Psychiatry, and they handle all manner of questions regarding children, and perhaps we'll have a point at some point in the program to discuss some of the areas that you look into. We want to discuss on this portion of the program, though, children and grief, because we have to have a focus. Do children suffer grief differently from the way adults do, Doctor?
Yes, they really do, and it's a complex and fascinating question because it's changed tremendously over the years. And I'm going to start in giving you part of an answer by going back to a time when very learned people really believed that children did not grieve, that in fact a reaction to a tremendous loss in their lives was simply not really taken in by them. And it was the adults who grieved, but not the children. And perhaps it may surprise some viewers that there are people today who, looking at that question, do children grieve, in a very technical, from a very technical, very sophisticated point of view, there are people who believe, well, obviously children do show a reaction to the loss of something, but we really can't call it grieving. We have to call it something else.
Well, it is interesting, Doctor. One of my own personal experiences in 4th or 5th grade, and I was thinking about this within the past few weeks. This young man, Dick Truby, was killed in a hunting accident. He was a 4th or 5th grader. And I've never, ever forgotten that, or the whole experience with the funeral parlor and so on. And I've often marveled at the fact that I only knew him marginally. He wasn't a close friend, but it perhaps was my first realization of the ending of things. Perhaps that's what you reflect on in this.
Well, at that age in your life, or let's say at that stage of your development, 4th and 5th grade, you certainly do know what death is. You're past the stage of stomping on ants and realizing that they don't come back to life, and you know, by that time, most of us have lost something, and we know what death is. But I think many children at that stage of their development aren't as ready as people are later in their development to show grief in what we might call the very typical ways. Many children at that stage may take the grief within, take the loss within, and keep it there a little bit, and not show it in the traditional way. And as you can imagine, that can create quite a problem. A child who's lost, let's say, a relative, and the adults are crying and are traditionally upset, and the child scampers off, goes out, plays.
Does not show any signs.
For instance, at least none that we could observe. And perhaps several days later, some small item of the child breaks, or the child loses a pet, and a pet dies, a small pet. And all of a sudden, there's a tremendous outpouring of unhappiness, of crying, and so on. Well, what's probably happened was the first impact was a startling impact, in a sense. And it took a while for that child's mind, his psyche, to really work that through. And then the next triggered it. And that may have been similarly with you.
Well, there's a lot when you're a youngster to bang, bang, you're dead.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you run around, you're cowboys and Indians, or you're cops
Absolutely.
and robbers, and everybody comes back, and,
Right.
and everything is all right. And there's a terrible finality about this. But judging the normal and abnormal reactions, you don't know. Maybe you should let a child, 2 weeks after a death, just get rid of all of his emotions.
Well, I think that would be certainly acceptable, but I thought when you started that question, you were going to say something like, well, suppose...
Ask it any way you wish.
Well, I'm going to ask it for you.
All
Suppose right. This child, let's say with a death of a relatively close relative, doesn't grieve, and 3 weeks later something dies and there's no reaction. What do you do then? What are you going to do? Well, there's no question that one of the reactions that we as parents might have is probably not a good one, and that reaction will be, what's the matter with you? Didn't you love Aunt Bill, somebody, or Uncle Bill? And then get on the child in a kind of an angry, overdone way, as if you're squeezing grief out like a toothpaste tube. And that's probably not.
I would never do that. That's
right.
why that kind of question would never occur to me. No, I really wouldn't. But I would be
But
interested in how a child would relate. We had a neighbor who died, and I remember my son, my number 2 son's reaction to it. He went around and he had kind of a hangdog look for a while, and then he came to me and he said, "Mr. So-and-so is dead." And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, that's life." And I thought, you know, that it is life.
Right.
And his reaction was normal, and whatever it was, it resolved the situation for him. And I
Right.
suppose for him, and it may not have been a close enough relationship
Right.
for him to have developed any trauma from. What do you look for? What's unusual in considering a child and their emotions reflecting on grief?
Let me answer the question quickly by saying, as we all know, children are not miniature adults, and children generally, I think we could say, are between the ages of perhaps 2 and 13. And we can even divide that up a little bit when we talk about children. Perhaps it's a good point to just say, we can't just say children. Up to 2, they're also children, but they're really more infants. So let's talk roughly between 2 and 13. In the early ages, let's say before school, grief can be shown in very much the way your number 2 son has shown it, namely sort of a down, hound dog, unhappy, weepy expression, disinterested in the outside world. But the younger the child, the more let's say the vegetative, and what I mean by that is that part of the body that relates to breathing and eating and going to the bathroom and sleeping, those things are more affected in the younger child. So we'd look for and would expect and wouldn't be worried about seeing a child with a major loss, a little one, who would have difficulty sleeping, might not be eating very well, would be irritable and cranky and crying. The older children, I don't know how old your number 2 son, how old was your number 2 son?
Oh, he was probably 9 or 10.
Well, that's a perfect age, because at that stage of life, there's a blossoming of the intellectual apparatus. And the affect, the feeling part of life, sort of takes a bit of a second seat to that. There, the issue is more intellectually handled. He went around for quite a while, or whatever, sort of down, depressed, sad, dealing with the loss. And then life goes on. He knows that at 9. Life could be like arithmetic. You have a column of figures that you add up, next column, and so on. So that would be
It's interesting
normal.
to see how kids react even to the death of a gerbil or something like this,
Right.
or a goldfish.
Right.
You know, I remember having rather elaborate funerals, you know, for some of these family pets.
Absolutely. The pet to the child is an extremely important issue with respect to relationships, with respect to the control over of the pet and the pet's ability to blend in and be a significant part of the child. Not the way parents often are. Come here, please sit down, wash your hands, do this, do that. Pets don't usually do that. Pets come when you call them and they play with you appropriately. So they take on a tremendous significance within the psyche of the child. Their loss, of course, is horrendous, but not just because of that. Because by and large, and you mentioned it before, we all play with death. Bang, bang, you're dead. Your medium, television, you know, if you get things thrown at you constantly about how much death and violence and so on. So it's all around us, in the streets, in the newspapers, and so on. Death is there. So children say to themselves, one of these days, in the back of my mind, Mommy may not come back. Daddy may not come back from his business trip or whatever. So the death of this gerbil is not, you know, it's not a big leap to see how it relates to the death of a child, the horror of a parent.
Among the things that they list in this little booklet that they gave me as an exemplar of what the child psychiatrists can look into, extended period of depression in which the child loses interest in daily activities and events, inability to sleep, loss of appetite, prolonged fear of being alone, acting much younger for an extended period, excessively imitating the dead person, repeated statements of wanting to join the dead person, and that could be dangerous.
That is dangerous. The actual number of suicides, and I'm going to leap into the heart of the problem, of children, let's say, under 10, is relatively small. But if that happens to be my child, that's a huge number. So you're absolutely right. When even a 7-year-old or a 6-year-old begins to talk about...
Because they think, and they hear it too, in
they
church, and they hear it from
Absolutely.
relatives, and well, he's gone to a better place.
Absolutely.
And well, I've seen it in the paper within the past month, you know.
Right.
I've gone to a better place or
Right.
something.
Right.
And
That child needs the attention, the affection, and the caring of those that remain, in a sense to detach him or her from the person who's died. That wish to join is a statement that the child is making that says, I cannot really survive. I can't separate. It's beyond what I want to do, and I'm going to join. And of course, that's not a good idea.
Okay, withdrawal from friends, sharp drop in school performance, or refusal to attend school. Now,
Right.
the thrust of this whole idea is there is some point here at which you want to get professional help.
Right.
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 And so what's the best way to go about that? And I suppose any of these danger signals that I've cited are all things that should blow a whistle and say, you know, get me some help. quickly.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But you can't put a kid on a couch or something.
Oh, yes,
Oh, you do?
You don't necessarily put it. I thought you were being
Oh,
metaphorical.
no, but that's traditionally the
Right, I
idea.
know. That's exactly what I meant. No, you know, child psychiatrists and child analysts see children who are months old on up to... no, that's very definitely.
And you get into their little psyches and you say, is it your daddy or
You
something?
work with a child generally using play. Play is the medium of the child. Children talk, obviously, but they don't say, gee, Mr. Norton, you know, I hurt right here and I'm sad that my mommy this and my daddy does the other thing. It's not that way. It's generally in the way the child plays, and so you begin to form a relationship and come out of it. But may I just say that, of course, child psychiatrists are not the only ones that know about grief and death, clearly, nor are we the only ones that are and can be very helpful. Certainly the family doctor, certainly the minister, the rabbi. I mean, there are many people that are very aware